Today, I'll provide a brief introduction to the Stage 2 concept in the ADS-B feeder image. If you look at a typical ADS-B feeder, there are a couple of different components that are running on your system. First, you have the decoder software that receives the radio signals from the hardware, from the software-defined radio or SDR, and then decodes that into airplane position data. Next, you have the live map of those airplanes as a web UI, as you can see here behind me. And finally, you typically want to send the data that you collected to one or more aggregators like FlightAware or adsb.lol or airplanes.live. There are a few typical scenarios where it might make sense to split these functions across two machines. The terms I typically use are on the one side the microfeeder, that system that deals with receiving and decoding the radio signal, and on the other side the Stage 2, the system that shows you the map and forwards the data to the various aggregators. One example where this makes sense is if your feeder is on a metered internet connection, for example an LTE or 5G wireless link or maybe a satellite link. Or if the connection to the feeder is really slow or has limited bandwidth, because sending the data once to the Stage 2 requires a lot less bandwidth than sending the same data to multiple aggregators or showing the live map remotely. Another example where the Stage 2 concept shines is if you have two or more receivers and want to see an aggregate live map of them, and have a central point from which you manage how they feed the various aggregators. The more feeders you run, the more interesting this becomes. So how do you set this up? All of the systems, whether a standard integrated feeder, a microfeeder, or a Stage 2 system, use the same software stack, the same ADS-B feeder image. First, simply follow the instructions to set up a feeder. I have a couple of videos for this here on this channel. At the end of the setup process, select microfeeder mode on the basic setup page. Next, set up a second system with the ADS-B feeder image. This can be another Raspberry Pi, or if this is something that you have access to, it can be a small VM that you run on an x86 system or even in the cloud. In many cases, you can run small VMs like this, for example, on your Synology NAS or on a Linux box that you may be using for home automation, or basically any other system that is usually turned on 24/7. For this system, you select Stage 2 at the end of the initial setup and then go to the Stage 2 setup page and connect the two systems together. Simply enter the IP address of the microfeeder in the Add Microfeeder session. This is pretty straightforward if the two systems are on the same network, but gets a little more complicated if they're not. Tailscale or zero tier can help with that, but that's a different video. Once this connection is complete, you can now look at your map or share the data with aggregators simply from the Stage 2 UI, and you generally don't need to access the UI of the microfeeder much anymore. I'm planning a few more videos to help you understand some of the more interesting ideas around Stage 2 systems, especially with multiple microfeeders. But for now, I hope this was useful and I hope you enjoy.